Welcome back to the Daily Drum on WHUR and Sirius XM Channel 141. This is a truncated edition of the Insight segment. I'm Harold Fisher. We continue our Women's History Month series tonight with a discussion about racial identity and the challenges, even difficulties, of answering the question, who am I? Journalist Natasha Alford has penned a memoir titled American Negra, and she joins me to talk about the book and some of the questions it raised and answered for her. Natasha, thank you so much for joining the conversation.
Harold, thank you for having me. It's great to be here.
Even before I get into the book, I just wanted to ask you, and this has to do, I guess, with the focus of the book. Did you ever look in the mirror as a young girl, or even as an adult, and ask the question, who am I?
Yes, it was an introspection that started early. And my parents were always very clear with me. You are an African American girl and you are a Puerto Rican girl. And no one can take that away from you. And so, although in the beginning that was the message I got, when I stepped into the world, I found that people were not always accepting of me being a Latina or being Puerto Rican, but they certainly saw me as a Black girl. And so, because of that, sometimes embracing the two cultures could be a challenge. And I write about that in American Negra, how I was so received and welcomed in the African American community. But in the Latino community, really, I found home with other Afro Latinos. And so that story of the Afro Latino is one that I try to illuminate in American Negra because we are here. We've been part of the culture for a long time. And it's a history that's important to know.
Why was it important to you? What were some of the internal challenges that you had to address?
Well, look, I think at the root of all of this is anti-Blackness hurts us no matter what, whether you're living in Puerto Rico or you're living in Detroit or Chicago, it's there. And none of these countries have been untouched by the legacy of colonization, of the transatlantic slave trade. And so as much as we say, oh, Latinos are people of color, truth is there are white Latinos, there are mixed Latinos, and there are Black Latinos. And racism and racial caste is also very much a part of these various communities. And so I just see an opportunity for unity and alliance with African Americans and Afro Latinos in particular, because we have a parallel fight. And within the United States, there are countless stories of Afro Latinos who've been discriminated against, who've dealt with police brutality, all of these things. So I think that there are tensions for sure, but I also want to highlight the ways in which there's an opportunity for community to be built.
Did you have an aha moment as a young adult?
Oh, yes. I write in American Negra very early in the book about being pulled over by the police, my family being pulled over, and the way that my African-American father was profiled by the police, but how my mother, being sort of racially ambiguous, she was able to get a pass a lot. I'm from Syracuse, New York. It's a very segregated part of New York State. It's very Black and white. And I just saw that she could navigate the world in a way that he didn't. So those experiences are very much painted out in the book. I try to take people on a journey with me of being part of this multi-ethnic family. And just how color blindness, as much as we may celebrate that as an ideal, is not a reality, and just how it can divide families. Well, isn't it funny? I'm a CNN political analyst, and some of this political stories I'm seeing, the rhetoric I'm seeing from politicians who are trying to demonize our conversations around diversity, they're demonizing us calling out the inequality in this really sick, twisted way. They're saying that those of us who refuse to be colorblind are actually the problem, when in fact, it's people who are gaslighting us, who are telling us that racism doesn't exist, that socioeconomic inequalities tied to race don't exist. So it's been a manipulation, particularly of Dr. Martin Luther King's words about, his dream for his children growing up in this country and not, seeing color. People have manipulated that message and are now using and weaponizing it against the very programs and laws that were meant to protect people of color and bring us into society in a way that we should have always been part of it.
You talk in the book a little bit about your experience at Harvard. Talk to me about that culture shock for you.
Well, I was a public school kid who always wanted to actually go to an HBCU, but I wrote down my dream the dream was to go to Spelman. Shout out to Spelman College. But when the financial aid package came, us being a working class family, my mom's a school teacher. My dad, he was working as a custodian after some years in the Army. We didn't have the money, and my mother didn't want me saddled down by loans the way that she had been as a first generation college graduate. So she said scholarship or nothing. And I applied to Harvard. It was a reach school. I got in. They basically paid for everything. And so that was part of the decision to go. But what I wanted to do in talking about Harvard was, one, to make visible the fact that Black people have always been there. Let's be very clear about that. We've always had a history. Harvard was actually built on the legacy of slavery. A lot of the wealth that went into building that institution came from slavery. But also we have been there as intellectuals, as contributors, as leaders. And I wanted to make that visible. But I also want to challenge this idea that because someone gets into the Ivy League or they go to college, that's the happy ending. Because for so many young, educated Black people, we struggle in college, or when we leave, we struggle to find our path, or people feel as though just because we've gone to college, we've somehow figured it all out. When in fact, in those early 20s, I call them the messy 20s, that's when we need the most guidance, the most support. And so I wanted to take the mask off of the, perfect, high achieving Black child kind of image and say, this is the real, this is the ups and downs of navigating school, navigating these higher education institutions. And this was one, young girl's journey in America to finding the American dream. And I think a lot of people can relate to it.
This obviously this memoir is a book of self-discovery for yourself. Are you at a point now in your life where there is a 100% understanding of where you're from and who you are? Or is your view of your own racial identity still evolving?
That is such a fascinating question. I would say that my race is pretty clear to me, right? I'm a Black woman, and that has been a settled fact for a long time. What I am understanding, though, is that my sense of my history is just unfolding. We did some genealogy as a part of the book, and I discovered the plantation that our family is tied to. It's in Darlington, South Carolina, the M.B. Gandy plantation. Beachman Alford, who we presume is my ancestor, we found his name on a Freedmen's Bureau document. Right. And so I imagine, what if I knew that when I was a 10-year-old girl, a 16-year-old girl, my sense of my belonging as an American, I think would have been even more strong, because it's not just theoretical that we helped build this country. I know, the blood, sweat, and tears of my ancestor, who I name, helped to build this country. So I think it's the sense of who I am as an American is only deepening. And this book is, I hope, a first book for me. Maybe at some point I'll do another book or a similar project, but that's the next phase, is getting more detail about that history, because just a little bit that I've learned has been transformative.
Can we talk a little bit of politics real quick?
Oh, sure. I'm always game for politics, as painful as it can be sometimes.
Well, it perhaps painful, but I will tell you, having just discovered your talent, your brilliance, and your ability to shut it down on CNN. Um, I have to say, the last time I saw you, and I think this is when you were on with S.E. Cupp, and I'm also a fan of S.E. Cupp and her brilliance. Um, you had me jumping off of the sofa
Oh, thank
and
you.
and yelling at my television in my living room. You are brilliant, and for anyone who is not familiar with your brilliance, shame on them. But you touched on where we are in one sense. What has happened just recently. Alabama's governor signing an anti DEI uh, uh, piece of legislation. You've seen the issue regarding removing books out of libraries that have to do with people of color. Obviously, this is um, the biggest and most important presidential election of our time, compared to the last one, which was also like that, and the one before. Um, uh, what concerns you as it relates to the Black electorate when you kind of look at all of the things that are kind of coming at us as we move into this presidential election?
Well, I think you alluded to it in the question. We've been bombarded with so much information, disinformation, current events, that our attention spans have gotten shorter. Our memories have gotten shorter. And so there are things that, someone like a Donald Trump could have said 10 years ago that would have ended his career, that people have already forgotten that he said. Insults to the Black community, suggestions of inferiority of some of our key leaders. Anytime he talks about a Black woman, think about it. There's an attack on her intellect. Maxine Waters, calling Omarosa a dog, right? These are coded yet very obvious racialized insults. And he does it in plain sight. And because people are so frustrated with their social standing, with what feels like a lack of social mobility in America, they are willing to trade that sense of the indignity over the way that this particular candidate has insulted the Black community, on the hope that somehow he will bring back the economy, and he will make sure that they get jobs and their lives are changed. And I want to be clear, I'm not saying this as a partisan, right? I don't go on television representing any particular party. Any party can get critiqued, and I have many critiques for the Democratic Party. But what I am saying is that I don't want people making decisions out of desperation. And I worry that because of a lack of communication on the Democratic side, that there are certain accomplishments that have gone, downplayed. And also there's a lack of understanding about who is in charge of what. We're talking about supply chain, making inflation go through the roof. I'm sorry, that's not your president who's in charge of that. The presidential office is not able to control that. There's certain things it can certainly do, but because of that lack of conversation, explanation, or even education, I believe that there are people who've been able to manipulate the frustration and use that for their political gain. So this is a moment that calls for journalists to do their jobs, to not get distracted, right? Because certainly Donald Trump is a brilliant user of the media. He knows how to get in front of television and make the news cycle center around him. And I think because of that, it's sort of taken the oxygen out of the room for some other really important conversations we need to have to understand just what the heck is going on.
Real quick, you have a book signing tomorrow in DC. Where is it going to be and what time? I think people really need to have an opportunity, not just to pick up the book, but to see you.
Yes, I'm sitting here looking at the flyer as we speak, putting it up to the screen. That's me with April Ryan, the great
Yeah,
April
and I went to
Ryan.
school with April. I love her. Tell her I said hey.
Oh, absolutely. April is my griot family. We will be at Eaton Hotel tomorrow, 1201 K Street, and it's at 2 p.m. It's an hour and a half event. I will be signing books. I love to give people personal messages of inspiration. To anyone you want me to sign the book, I will sign it to them. But it means so much to have your support. Even when you get a book deal, as much as it's a celebration, really it's getting the book in people's hands. And I used to live in DC. I was a school teacher in DC. I taught at school right in Mount Vernon near the convention center. And so this is in many ways like a second homecoming, even though I didn't
Yeah.
grow up there. I have so much love for the city. So I'm excited to be back.
Natasha Alford, congratulations. Thank you so much for talking to us. I appreciate your time.
Thank you, Harold.
That is the Daily Drum for this Friday, March 22nd. For News Director Renee Nash, reporters Millette Green, Vermonte Bryant, producer Candace Atkins Wilson, and engineer Bobby Adams, I'm Harold Fisher. Good night and have a wonderful weekend.